indirect measurement. A pole that is 2.5 meters casts shadow that is 1.77 meters long. At the same time, a nearby building casts a shadow that is 46.25 meters long. How tall is the building? Round your answer to the nearest meter. Okay, so we have these two figures, and the sun is in the same position for both of these figures, and it's coming down at the same angle. So in this case, what it's creating is two similar triangles because we have the same angle coming off the sun and creating a shadow that's proportionally length based on how tall the figure is. So that's the first bit of information. So when we have two similar triangles, we can create a proportion. And we need to make sure we match up things that are proportional. So what I always have students do is decide which one do you want to talk about first, the pole or the building? So in this case, I'm just going to go with pole since I'm doing this one on my own, and then building. So, oops, help if I spelled it correctly. So all the numbers for the pole lengths will go on top. All the measurements for the building will go on the bottom. And then the other thing too that you need to take into account is there's a shadow length and there's a height. So we just have to decide because there's a left side and a right side for a proportion. So I'm going to say the left side is about the height and the right side is about the shadow. And what this does is it kind of creates a map. So it tells you how to fill this in. So you're always going to be given two figures. You just decide which figure goes on the top and which figure goes on the bottom. So sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's two objects like this where it's a pole and a building. Just depends on what you're given, but it's always going to be two objects. And then generally you're going to be talking about height and shadow. Sometimes instead of shadow, it's distance from an object, but it's the same idea. So this little map kind of helps you on all of these because you'll be given this similar scenario for each one. So now if we go through and we fill this in, so the map helps you because I can say pole height. So I want the height of the pole. So I come over here and I go, oh, the height of the pole is 2.5. And then on the bottom, it's height and building for this section. So then I go over here and the height of the building, we don't know. It's y meters tall. So I'm going to put y. And then let's go with a different color here for the shadow. So this time I'm going to go back to the top here and it's shadow and pole. So this is the area I'm going to fill in for shadow and pole. So I'm going to go to pole and the shadow length is 1.77. And then for the building, because this is building and shadow, so it just tells you what to fill in because the two words are right here next to each other. So I have 46.25. So there's just kind of a simple way to help you fill the proportion out to make sure that everything is in the correct place. And then once you have this filled out, which is exactly what they have filled out down here, then you start cross multiplying. So you can see that they have 1.77y. And then they have 2.5 times 46.25. They multiply these two numbers together and they get 625. I keep rounding my numbers off here. And then the last step, which they're not really showing you here, they're dividing by 1.77 on both sides because this cancels. Any number divided by itself cancels, and that's why y is by itself. And then once we divide, we get 65.324 ... which means it goes on and on and on. They want us to round to the nearest meter, so we just look at this. Is it closer to 65 or 66? Because we already see 65. So we have 0.3. If that's 4 or smaller, we round down to what we started with. If it's 5 or bigger, that's when you would round up to the next number because it's closer to the next number. So it's just kind of a quick thing on rounding. And that's all we do. So we go to 65 meters, and that's our answer. So we're going to write this little map for each one and just talk through it because it does tend to help students fill it out. Once it's filled out, it's generally not as bad. It's just getting it filled out with the corresponding parts. All right, so I'm going to clear this out, and we're going to start the next page. Okay, so we have a pole that is 3.5 meters. So I'm going to draw my thing here. So this is a pole, and it's 3.5 meters tall, and it casts a shadow that is 1.57 meters. So remember, this is the shadow here, which I know that's a really horrible shadow, but this is my shadow. So that means the sun is somewhere up over here. And then at the same time, a nearby tower, and normally you should probably draw the tower a little taller, but I didn't give myself a lot of room above here. So this is my tower. It casts a shadow. So here's its shadow that is 38.25 meters. And we don't know its height. All right, so here's our problem. They want to know how tall the tower is, and then we're going to round to the nearest meter. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to start setting out my proportion. And remember, when we set up a proportion, we have two objects. We always have two objects. We just have to choose. And I'm going to go pole, tower. So all my measurements for pole are going to go on the top. All my measurements for tower are going to go on the bottom. And then I have height and shadow. So I have both of them in this case. So let's go start filling this in now. So remember, this means height pole. So the height of the pole is going to go here. The height of the pole is 3.5, which you can, if you draw it out, it just helps you visualize it, which I'm a very visual person. I need to actually see the figure because it helps me keep everything straight, but it also gives it to you up here. And then height of the tower, we don't know that, right? That was our question mark. Shadow for the pole, we have 1.75. Shadow for the tower, we have 38.25. So now we're going to start cross multiplying. We get 3.5 times 38.25 equals 1.57 question mark. We should have a calculator here. Perfect. Just got to move this around where I can actually see things. So 3.5 times 8.25 equals, and we get 133,875 equals 1.75 question mark. And then what we want to do is divide both sides of our equal sign by 1.57 because we want to get this question mark by itself. Any number divided by itself cancels. That's why we want to divide, so that we can get question mark all by itself. All we have to do is go back to our calculator and click divide 1.57. And again, I already have my number in there from before, so I can just hit divide. I don't actually have to retype the number because it's already in there. So I get 8,527 ... And remember, we want to round to the nearest meter here. I'll close this so it's out of my way. So I need to decide is this closer to 85, which is what we're starting with here, 85, or 86? Remember, I'm dealing with 0.2. That's the number I want to look at for rounding. If this number is 4 or smaller, I'm going to round down to what I started with. If it was 5 or bigger, that's when you round up. All right, so we get 85 and check. Perfect. Next, clear. All right, so they already drew this one for us, which makes it a little bit quicker. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing this part, and then we can decide what we have here. So a woman wants to measure the height of a nearby tower. She places a 9-foot pole in the shadow of the tower so that the shadow of the pole is exactly covered by the shadow of the tower. So this is the shadow of the pole, and this is the shadow of the whole tower. So she matched it up so that the pole's shadow ended at the tower's shadow. So we have pole and tower again. I know that right away. And then we also have shadow again. Messing up my shadow there. All right. And then they're telling us that the total length of the tower shadow is 160. So they didn't fill that in for us. And the pole's shadow, so I'm going to go like this, is 4.75. They want to know how tall the tower is. And remember, they told us it was a 9-foot pole. So they told us that already. So we have height again. Kind of squeezing that one in there. All right, so height of the pole was 9. Height of the tower, we don't know. Shadow for the pole is 4.75. Shadow for the tower is 160. So we're just going to start cross multiplying here. And I'm going to come over here so I have a little more room. Times 160 equals 4.75 times question mark. So now I'm going to go to my calculator here. And I have 9 times 160 equals 1,440 equals 4.75 question mark. Horrible question mark. And now I have two sides of my equation. I want to get question mark by itself, so I'm going to divide by 4.75 on both sides of my equal sign. 4.75 divided by 4.75 cancels. Any number divided by itself cancels. And I just come back to my calculator. It's already in there, so I can just hit divide. 4.75, 5, not 2, equals, I get 303.15, blah, 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 blah. So it goes dot, 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 dot. Sorry, not blah, 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 blah. So then I need to decide, because they want us to round to the nearest foot. So I need to decide, is it closer to 303, which I'm starting with, or do I need to go up to 304? So I'm going to look at that number right past the decimal, which is 0.1. That's smaller than 4, so I'm going to go to 303, which is what I started with. Check. All right, one more of these. Okay, so we know we're going to do a proportion here. So this one is a little different. So it says DeAndre wants to measure the width of the river. So here's the width of the river here, the question mark. He marks off 2 right triangles, as shown in the figure. The base of the larger triangle has a length of 63, so they're showing us this. So they've marked the triangle for us this time. And the base of the smaller triangle has 28. So they're calling these bases. I'm going to mark these both with kind of a black line. So remember, these are the bases of the triangles. The height of the smaller triangle is 23.1. And we're going to call this one height as well. Even though it's width, they're calling it height in here. So we'll call them both height. So we have height and we have base. It's a little different. And then we also have 2 triangles. So we can say large triangle and small triangle. That kind of helps us keep them separate. So we have 2 items. We have a large triangle and a small triangle. And this time we have height and we have base, because that's what they're referring to in this one. So we still have all of our pieces here, and we can fill this proportion in. So now I'm going to go with the height of the large triangle. Remember, I marked that in red. It's question mark. Height of the small triangle, again, I marked it in red, 23.1. Base of the large triangle, so that's the black line here, that's 63. And the base of the small triangle, that's this black line here on the small triangle, so 28. So it's all just about matching up, making sure that you understand the corresponding parts here. And this one is a little bit different. So because we're talking about the width of the river here, but what is this the width of? We don't really know. So by calling it height, that kind of makes it easier to identify it. These are the heights. These are the bases. And if you notice that we're dealing with both the parts that make the 90 degree, the right triangle part. We're not dealing with this long part that we call the hypotenuse. We could if they'd given us measurements for it, but they hadn't. All right, so let's go ahead and cross multiply. So we get 28 times question mark equals 63 times 23.1. All right, 28 question mark equals, let's go to our calculator here. And we get 63 times 23.1 equals 1,455.3. And we're going to divide by 28. Oops. Helps if I have my pen on both sides of our equal sign. Remember, there's always 2 sides of the equal sign. 28 divided by 28 equals question mark. And because, again, any number divided by itself becomes 1. I already have the 1,455.3 in the calculator. So I can hit divide, and it automatically knows that I want to divide that number. You don't necessarily have to retype it, but you can if you want to. Equals, so we get 51.975. Remember, they want us to round to the nearest meter again. So we need to decide, is this closer to 51, which is what we're starting with, or 52? So we look at the number right after what we want to round to. And it's 0.9. 9 is bigger than 4, or sorry, 5 or bigger. So we're going to round up to the next number. So we have 52 on this one. So the river is 52 meters wide. All right, we finished that one. Yay.